Once again, hello to everyone that's joining us, and welcome along to the Business Support Network on our first of our kind of weekly webinars. Today is something that I have been particularly excited about, and I know a couple of other people have, because Paula is a very well-known speaker in terms of what she's been doing over the last few years. As a bit of background, Paula was an international athlete, and as she kind of moved on from there, turned into a business coach, and she helps a number of individuals, a number of businesses kind of get the best out of what they're trying to achieve, and looks at kind of high performance cultures and what have you. Now, Paula is here today to present her kind of no nonsense talk, should we say, which is Stop Faffing and Start Focusing. And I think that is something that I think that's quite a few of us kind of perhaps are guilty of over time, and perhaps we all know somebody else that could perhaps do with a bit of a kick to kind of stop faffing. So it's something that I've been really looking forward to hearing from Paula. So as always, and as I always say to start off these talks, nobody's here to listen to me. It's all about you, Paula. So thank you for your time today, and welcome on board. We're really looking forward to hearing from you.
Fantastic, thank you, Paul. Just to double check, actually, did we say 45 minutes today?
Yeah, that's if that's okay with you.
Yeah, I couldn't remember whether we'd done 30, 45, an hour, because I can do all of them.
Could you do all afternoon, Paula?
Not quite, well, that would be faffing a little bit.
Defeats the object.
I think we said 45, didn't we?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Right, so eeny, meeny, miny, mo. What am I? I've got you on. I'm just switching my view actually, because I've. Yeah. Okay, let's switch around that way to get me on there. Okay, cool. So you've already given me an absolutely fantastic introduction there, Paul. Thank you very much for that. So yes, just to reiterate, you've almost covered all my bases already. So I have a long corporate background originally. In a slight fit of madness, I actually started my coaching business in November 2008, right at the point when the recession hit. So I think it's fair to say that much as this is a very different scenario, this challenge of the uncertainty and what's going to happen in business is strangely familiar. But I guess what I bring to business is that whole combination of the corporate background combined with the sports background, and now combined with lots of small business knowledge as well. So very much working with people on getting the sort of 86 bazillion ideas out of their head, and getting those down into clear, simple action plans, and then to actually help them turn those plans into a reality. Now, just to check, Paul, I haven't done slides or anything for today. You're just getting me. So I'm hoping you're okay with that. Mostly because I think slides are a bit faffy and a bit boring to watch. So not that I'm that exciting to watch, but I'll do my very best. So what I've actually found over the years is that I think faffing can actually become something of an art form when you run your own business, probably because we're never short of ideas. I very rarely come across anybody building a business that feels like they don't have enough ideas. If anything, it's quite the opposite. And I think that often leads to confusion, uncertainty, a lack of clarity and exactly what to focus on. And all of that can just turn into procrastination and faffing. So you can have the best plan in the world, but actually if you don't have enough clarity on the point of the plan, or if you just don't have enough clarity around how you're going to implement the plan, then it's probably never going to come to fruition. So what I have for you today is 5 or 6 tips around how to get rid of faffing and procrastination and all that sort of overwhelm, and help you stay really focused and really productive. So the first thing I want to talk about is the whole concept of time management, and how actually I think time management is little more than a stick to beat ourselves with. So we've probably all done some kind of time management courses or modules, or we've read about it, or we've learnt about it. And actually most people I find think that they're really bad at time management. But the simple fact of it is that actually we can't manage time at all. So it's an enormous myth. So we've always got the same number of hours in every day. We've always got 60 minutes in every hour, and we can't do anything to manage that at all. We cannot stretch it, elongate it, repeat it. We can't get it back. So to me, actually, the whole concept of time management is a myth. And I think it's one of the reasons why we tie ourselves up in knots quite a lot and believe that we're just not very good at time management, because actually we're trying to do something that's physically impossible. So the crucial thing for me is when you look at the difference between people who are mega productive and constantly get lots done compared to the people who are, for want of a better phrase, the blue arse fly and always have the best of intentions but never quite put them into practice, the key is actually all about self-awareness and taking responsibility. So we cannot manage time at all, but we absolutely can manage us. So that's the biggest single tip that I can give you to start with this is, if you are somebody who suffers with procrastination or faffing or overwhelm, the biggest thing that you can do is understand that what happens with every minute of your day is your responsibility, and you've always got the opportunity to make a choice about that. Now, obviously, there are certain things where the choice is black and white and the choice is taken out of your hands. So, you know, in business, nothing is ever straightforward, or rather, nothing is purely predictable. So there's always going to be a phone call out of the blue, or somebody that needs some help, or something that kind of comes up just when you think you're really focused. So we know that we cannot control all of those circumstances, but the place we need to get to is to be very proactive with our time and really take responsibility for the decisions that we make with it constantly. So whenever there is a distraction or an interruption, then we have to ask ourselves the question about, is this my priority right now? Do I need to deal with this right now? Or is this a distraction? So we can proactively look at every one of those things which potentially could just come and throw us off course. And we can just stop and breathe and pause and make sure that we're making the right decision and then taking the right action as a result of that. So that's my first key tip, is to really understand that time management doesn't exist, but self-management is absolutely crucial. And the most important thing that we can do is build our self-awareness and really take responsibility for what we do with our time. And on that basis, a distraction can only ever be a distraction if we allow it to be, or if we choose to let it become a distraction, which I know probably sounds a bit counterintuitive. You know, if something comes in, hits us out of the blue, that's an immediate distraction. But as a very quick example, distractions can be things like pings on social media or emails that pop up. And these are the things where we've got a choice of that. So I would absolutely say, and I'll come on to this a little bit more, but if you have notifications and pings and pop-ups and things like that, take responsibility for switching those things off, because you're guaranteed constant interruption if you've got all those notifications and pings and pop-ups and things. So that's tip one, is forget about time management altogether and really think about taking responsibility for what you do with your time and investing it and really valuing it. That's the key thing. Really appreciate the value of your time, because you can only ever have it once. So tip number two is to use schedules and deadlines. I don't know too many people who don't actually respond really well to a solid deadline. I think one of the best examples is the day before you go on holiday or the day before you've got a break planned. It's amazing how much you can get done, isn't it? Whereas normally we'll just let something drift in tomorrow or to drift into next week. But when you absolutely know you want to take a proper break and possibly, you know, you're going to be out of the country, then there's a whole different ramification for just not getting something done. And it's amazing how that then really focuses you and can make an enormous difference to actually staying on your agenda, ticking all that stuff off and getting, you know, just getting all of that stuff achieved. So schedules can be a really good way to help yourself to stay on track. And schedules can be for anything in your business. you might have come across the concept of things like a default diary or your ideal week diary. So I quite often talk to clients about mapping out your ideal week, so that you then structure in specific time for the things that you know are your most likely distraction, or the things where you disappear off down a rabbit hole. So the classic ones are things like social media and emails. I think we could literally spend all day, every day, just stuck in those two places and really struggle to get anything else done. So I would always encourage you to schedule in specific time for things like your emails and things like social media. Now, for some people, you need to be super responsive to things like your emails or social media messages. But actually, I think 95% of businesses don't have to be anywhere near as responsive as they believe they do. If you're something like an eBay seller, or you've got a very instant business that's something like that, then yes, people are probably going to expect a fairly fast response from you. But if you are in a service-based business, or a coaching, a consultancy, a training, anything like that, web design, graphic design, where you're delivering something like that, then put yourself in your customer's shoes at that point. So we very often kind of think, right, that customer's going to expect an immediate response from me. Whereas when you think about that with you in the customer's shoes, we very rarely expect that sort of instant response from anybody else. We're quite happy if it takes somebody a couple of hours or half a day or even 24 hours to respond to an email or something like that. And yet we can often set such different standards about what we expect of our own responses. So for the vast majority of businesses, if you put specific times into your diary for which times a day you're going to deal with your emails, which times a day you're going to spend time on social media, then actually what you can start to do is educate your customers a little bit more. They will start to know. They will start to know that I've got a cat in the office who'd just like to leave the office. Aren't they? They're just a joy, aren't they? Come on. Not that that's faffing or distraction at all. So customers, at that stage, customers potentially start to actually understand when you're available and when you're not available. And you can also think about things like when you take on a new customer, then that's the perfect opportunity to almost lay the ground rules about when you're available and when you're not available. Because it's not reasonable for somebody to expect you to be available 24/7, but it's also not reasonable of you to expect you to be able to run your business 24/7, because that's just a path to burnout. So actually, when you first take on a customer, letting them know your typical response times, turnaround times, the times of day or days of the week when you're typically available compared to the times where you say you're not available, then you can actually get that client relationship off to a really solid footing, and you can then help to manage your time a lot more proactively rather than customers constantly believing that you will jump as soon as they ask. And the other challenge is that if you're super responsive to all your customers, then you set that as the norm. You essentially create that expectation amongst your customers that you are always going to be available. And that makes it incredibly difficult to take any time out, even if that's a few hours of an afternoon, or especially if you want to then take a week off or something like that, which, let's face it, we all need at sometimes to recharge the batteries. So definitely look at scheduling in the things that you know that can be a distraction. I would always encourage you to actually map out your week as much as you can. So you've got fixed slots for your typical things, but also by mapping out your week in more detail, it gives you the opportunity to also schedule in the things that so often you don't get round to. And very often that's things like your own marketing, it's your business development activities. It's very often things like building processes or streamlining your business, because none of that stuff seems quite as urgent as the customer who's on the phone right now. So when you use more schedules and deadlines and structure like that, then you can start to make sure that, you know, the things that you've got on your growth plan, you're actually structuring those into your diary rather than always treating those as the last thing on your list and trying to squeeze them in around all of the other demands that you've got going on. Now, the other key thing, I touched on notifications and pings and pop-ups and things like that. And the psychologists will actually tell us that it takes us around 20 minutes to get to a place of really deep focus. So when you're doing something quite detailed and you really kind of get into your groove, it actually takes us about 20 minutes to get to that place of really deep concentration. And the big challenge there comes if you've just got into that kind of real concentration zone, and then you get a ping on your mobile or you get a pop-up on your laptop, and you just go over to check that, even if you're going over to check that for 30 seconds, that's 20 minutes of concentration that's just gone out of the window. Because once you've got into that real deep zone of concentration, you can snap out of it immediately. So every time you distract yourself with one of those pings or one of those pop-ups, you're potentially delaying that concentration span by another 20 minutes each time. So if you think about how many times during the day you just check your mobile or you just check your social media, it's possibly where you think it's just grabbing 5 minutes from you here and there, it's quite possibly actually stealing a good hour or two of your productivity or focus throughout the day. So anything that you can do to reduce notifications and pings and pop-ups and things like that. I mean, the most simple one is to make sure that your phone is always on silent, but also be really, really choosy about what notifications you allow to come up. And think as well about having certain times of the day where your email is absolutely closed, your social media is closed. So if you've got something you really need to focus on, shut all that other stuff down and just make it so those distractions literally can't come in. It's almost like you're closing the door to the office, and social media and emails and all the other stuff are essentially outside the office, so you can stay in that really concentrated zone then. So that's my second tip, is really think about schedules and deadlines. Deadlines are just super powerful. And think about managing out the distractions and not feeling like you constantly have to be at your client's beck and call and being available to them 24/7. One thing I would say to you about that as well is customers actually love to be managed. And I often talk about customers being like naughty children or mischievous children. And if you're the supplier and they're the customer, then you've got actually a little bit of a parent and child relationship going on. And you're the parent here and the customer is like the naughty child. So it's kind of their responsibility to constantly check their boundaries. And that comes into play not just in terms of when you're available and how responsive you are, but whether you can just do this extra thing and that extra thing, and could you just add that on, and could I just ask you for this? And these are the classic things where you might call this scope creep, where you suddenly find yourself doing an awful lot more for a customer than you expected, and you're not quite sure how it happened, because you've just done that one extra thing because you're nice and lovely and they're a great customer. But before you know it, suddenly you're actually doing loads more than they're paying for, but they don't really appreciate it, and you feel taken advantage of. But that's because they've done the typical naughty child and kept testing the boundaries, and at no point have you said to them, look, this is where the boundary is. So if you suffer with a lot of scope creep, or just find yourself very regularly over delivering or over servicing, then come back to that point of laying out your stall with a new customer and really thinking about ground rules and boundaries. So as I say, customers actually love to be managed. When you give them real clarity about, this is when I'm available, this is exactly what I'll do for you, this kind of thing would be extra, but it's not out of the question. And these are also my expectations of you. So you can map all of that out up front, and what you're giving your customer there is real clarity. Now, often we kind of think that that's a bit bossy and a little bit forceful, and especially if you're new in business or you need a bit more business, it's very easy to be quite kind of soft and compliant, and that just actually sets the scene for probably becoming a bit of a doormat, or the customer being the boss and you being very much the servant to the customer. So actually getting really clear on what your boundaries are and setting that out in stone to your customers is giving them real clarity. Ah, yes. So Danielle's just mentioned, my headphones go on when I don't wish to be disturbed. perfect. Yeah, you are literally blocking everything out, which is definitely a perfect plan. So I have detoured there slightly with schedules and deadlines and boundaries. We've just added in some boundaries as well. But all of those things are, again, they all come back to taking responsibility and really thinking proactively about managing you and managing your time. So that was tip number 2, is using schedules and deadlines. Now, tip number 3 is about making use of to-do lists. And I know this is always an interesting area, because I know some people absolutely love lists. Some people are just not list fans at all. One big thing I would say is that when I'm talking about lists, this can be in any format you choose whatsoever. So some people absolutely love things like Trello and Asana, or a CRM system that's got lots of workflow in it. I know lots of people still just love a nice handwritten to-do list where you can cross things off, and there is just something incredibly satisfying, isn't there, about that whole get that pen through that marker. And I know some people even love things like adding an extra thing onto your to-do list just so you can cross it off. I've done that thing, it wasn't on the list, but now I'm going to add it so I can deliberately cross it off and give you that nice sense of satisfaction. So as with all of my tips here, there is not a one-size-fits-all approach to this. And that's also one of the other things that I see as quite a big flaw in the whole time management theory. Because the time management theory implies that there is one process, and if we all follow that one process, then we'll all be incredibly productive and well organised. But the simple fact is, we're humans, we are all different, we are all individual. We have different working styles, we have different working patterns, we have different energy levels. So we have to find the way of working that absolutely fits with us. And that's just the same with a to-do list. So you might love an electronic version, you might love a paper version, you might love something in Excel or Word or any other format. So that's absolutely fine. So what I would say is, if you're the type of person that says, I hate lists, my argument would be that you just haven't found the style of list that works best for you. So don't worry about what you call it. Again, I know some people say, I just hate the name to-do list. So to-do list, actions list. It could just be, what are we on today? 16th of June list. Frogs to eat list. You can call it whatever you want, and you can put it in whatever format really works for you. And again, I would say, if you've tried it and it's not quite working, try a different format, try an online version or switch to a paper version and see what you get from that. Now, the biggest thing about a to-do list is discovering how to create one that's realistic. So I would always encourage you to actually work with a daily to-do list, because anything more than that means that every single day you're working with a list which you cannot get finished. And that in itself is quite demoralizing, isn't it? But I think what that also leads to is a lack of clarity about how long things take and what you actually can get done that day. Whereas a daily list is really solid for focus. That should be just the things that you're absolutely committed to and realistically can achieve that day. Now, what I typically find is when people start to look at daily lists, more often than not, people are putting about 3 days' work onto a daily list. So most of us set ourselves up to fail straight away, and then we tell ourselves that we're absolutely rubbish at time management because we haven't ticked off a 3-day list in the space of a day. So for me, there's a bit of a process to go through here in making a start with daily lists, but then keeping a real eye on it and thinking about, if you didn't get it all done, why not? Is that because you're too easily distracted, you lacked focus, you disappeared off down a social media rabbit hole, the wrong things were on the list? Or is it more often than not just that you've put so much on your list that you were never realistically capable of achieving it to start with? So you can actually, if you just keep a regular eye on what's on that list and how close you get to achieving it, you can start to put yourself in a position where you know exactly how much you can get done in a day, and you can schedule that in properly. And that's the type of thing that will really help you to stay focused. Whereas when you're working on a list which is massive and you know there's no way you're going to get it done, that in itself attracts kind of distraction and going off track, and that sort of feeling of being slightly demoralized because you know it's never going to be finished. Now, my second key tip around using daily lists is to make this the last thing you do each working day. And I'm going to give you 3 reasons why this is actually a brilliant thing to do. It's a really simple thing to do, but actually for a lot of people, this makes a huge difference to their businesses. So the very first reason is that when you make the last part of your working day, your list, your plan for tomorrow, you actually give yourself a signal that you are now ending work for the day. You are switching off. And when you work for yourself, and especially if you work from home, and let's face it, the vast majority of us are working from home at the moment in lockdown and not necessarily in the nice office environment that we would like to have. But when you run your own business, it can be so difficult to allow yourself to switch off at the end of the day. It's just really, really easy for it to drift a little bit through your evening. And again, I'll just check my emails, I'll just respond to such and such, I'll just catch up with social media. And it's just really easy for that to almost bleed throughout your evenings. And the big challenge with that is that very often leads to working tired. And if you're working tired and drained, you can guarantee you will get a lot less done because you can't focus. Your productivity levels will really drop when your energy really drops. So that's tip number 1, is do your to-do list at the end of today for tomorrow, because it gives you permission to actually switch off and properly recharge your batteries. The second reason why this is such a great thing to do is because you then give that list to your subconscious mind. And your subconscious is massively powerful. Your subconscious is essentially running the show, but we don't even notice that it's doing it. So you know that good old adage about when you sleep on things, everything feels clearer in the morning? That's because your subconscious brain just slots everything into place. So I need to go back and check my stats, but if I'm right, it's something like your conscious brain is able to deal with about 2,000 bits of information per second, which is massive. But your subconscious brain is capable of dealing with something absolutely ludicrous, like about 4 million bits of information per second. So it's just a million miles an hour. But it's without energy. It doesn't take any effort, which is amazing. So it means that actually when you harness the power of your subconscious, that will really help you with your productivity. So if you do your to-do list for tomorrow at the end of today, then you gift it to your subconscious and it will slot it all into place for you the next morning. One of the beautiful things about that is that something which today might feel awkward or uncomfortable or ominous, or you're just thinking, God, this is going to take me forever, I really don't want to do it, really not looking forward to it, you know, I've got to write that blog and I know it's going to take me days to do. That it's amazing how your subconscious will slot that into place, and you will look at that list the next morning, and that task which felt monumental or really awful will feel so much easier. It's just amazing. So that's the second reason why it's a great thing to do. And the third reason is because the first 20 minutes of your working day will set the tone for the rest of your day. So if your first 20 minutes are, where am I today? Who have I got to talk to? What calls have I got? What emails have I got? Which webinars am I on? Who am I supposed to be coming back to? Oh God, I was supposed to respond to such and such. If that's the whole first 20 minutes, then you will find that the rest of your day will mirror that sort of frantic, disorganized feel. Whereas if the first 20 minutes are, well, actually, I've got my to-do list, I already know what item 1 is, and I'm getting straight into my groove, then that sets the tone to have a really calm, focused and productive day. So that small action can make a really big difference to helping you get into a productive groove really early in your day. So I can't emphasize enough how important I think a daily to-do list is, and how big a difference it can make to help you stay really focused. Danielle has asked a question. Do you suggest mind dumping on a sheet of paper the evening before? Yes, that's definitely a great practice. I don't have time to give you all of my tips today, but one thing I would always suggest as well is every so often, certainly every 3 months at an absolute minimum, and probably more frequent than that, is to do a total brain dump of your business. Every single thing that you know you need to do for your business. Brain dump it, separate it into timescales, split it into something like the stuff that needs to happen in the next 3 months, and then 3 to 6, 6 to 9, 9 to 12, and further on. And then essentially anything that's 3 months onwards, you don't need to touch at all for the next 3 months. Whereas what typically happens is we have all this stuff in our head. And when we keep things in our head, it's actually like having fireworks in our brain, because all those things, they constantly pop at us. Remember this, don't forget that, talk to so-and-so, do this, do that, email that person. And it is like these fireworks. And when they're in there, there's no organisation to it at all. There's no logical order to it. And it generally goes at about 1,000,000 miles an hour. Whereas actually when you get all of that out and down on paper, you just take away all of those kind of brain frazzling things really that also come and totally steal your focus. So yes, brain dump, absolutely. I would totally agree with that. So that's tip number 3, is really getting to grips with to-do lists and doing them the night before for tomorrow if you can. Tip number 4 is to, and I've started to touch on this already, but it's to really start to understand you. Start to understand things like your natural working patterns. So we all have peaks and troughs of energy. We have peaks and troughs of energy through the day and peaks and troughs throughout the week. So some people are absolutely on fire on a Monday, whereas other people just find that it takes them a bit of time to ease themselves into the week a little bit more. Some people are super productive at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, whereas other people can't get the sleep out of their eyes at that stage and just can't focus. Some will have a lull at, say, 11:30, other people might have a lull at 2 p.m. But the key thing is that we're all absolutely different. But when you look at scheduling your week, if you can schedule your week in a way that matches your natural energy peaks and troughs, then what you'll find is you are working with your natural energy flow through the week rather than trying to fight against it. Whereas if you keep trying to put focused work or complicated work or stuff that perhaps isn't your sweet spot into that time of day or week when your energy actually isn't at its highest, that's when you'll find things a real struggle. And what you'll also find is in doing that, things will take you probably twice as long as if you can match them. So if do the complex stuff or the things that need real focus, do those at the times of the day where you have your real focus, and you will sail through them a whole lot faster. So really get to grips with your own natural energy style, your own kind of preferred working patterns, what really floats your boat, what switches you off, and really think about matching all of that to the way that you structure and schedule your week. Now, one other crucial thing within that as well, and again, I've slightly touched on this already, is getting to grips with how long things actually take you. So your classic examples are things like a complicated email. Maybe that's an email after a meeting, or it's an email for a quote or a proposal, or just a tricky subject that you're handling by email. It's really easy. Most people typically think that kind of thing takes 15 to 20 minutes, possibly 30. Very often that kind of thing will take you 45 to 60 minutes. And this is why we so often say, I'm terrible at time management, because that should have taken me 20 minutes and it took me 60. But if you keep a track on that, and if you keep a view on that, and your daily to-do list can help you with this, but if you was to watch that over the course of a few weeks, then actually by the end of those few weeks, then you can confidently say to yourselves, I realise now that an email after a meeting, remember meetings, but an email after a meeting is going to take me 60 minutes, and that's how much time I need to schedule in for it, rather than constantly telling myself I can do it in 20 and failing miserably. So really get to grips with how long things genuinely take, not how long you would love to be able to get things done in because you're a natural optimist. And funnily enough, I do also find as well that I think it's a real trait that you have to be optimistic to go into business for yourself. You know, you've got to be optimistic, enthusiastic, possibly bordering on slightly unhinged to take that leap and set up your own business. But what that also means is that sometimes that translates into being incredibly optimistic and enthusiastic about how much we can get done in a day. Whereas when we can scale that back and be really realistic, then we can really stay focused and actually get a lot more done. So that's tip number 4. How am I doing for time? We're good for time. Tip number 5, and I mentioned him briefly before, is tip number 5 is eat your frog for breakfast every day. Now, some of you, I imagine, are probably familiar with this concept already. It comes from the book by Brian Tracy, which I'm pretty sure it's called Eat That Frog. And I have to say, it's a brilliant, brilliant book. It's one of my favourite books. It's got something like 21, 22 productivity tips. What I love about it though is each one is a chapter. Each chapter is about 5 pages and it's really big writing. So you could literally read a chapter in about 3 or 4 minutes, and you could do something like a chapter a day or a chapter a week. And it's really good to just keep you thinking about productivity and focus. But one of the key tips there is eat your frog for breakfast every day. And what this is actually all about is that we've almost always got that one thing that we know we need to deal with and we really don't want to. You know, your classic rewriting your About Me page on your website has been on most people's to-do list for about the last 3 years. Getting your new photographs done, things like that. You know, there's always something that we have to deal with. And this is your kind of big, hairy, stinking, slimy, ugly frog that you just don't want to have to get to grips with. And what happens is, while we leave that frog on our to-do list and we don't get around to dealing with it, without us even realizing it, we will inadvertently drag other things out. We will find ourselves naturally drifting into distraction, social media. I'll just put the laundry on. And we will fill our time magically so that we constantly run out of time, so we can't get around to this frog that we don't want to deal with. So the key thing is, when you're doing your to-do list for tomorrow, identify what that frog is and make that the first thing on your to-do list. So you get on with it before you've got the time to talk yourself out of it or drag everything else out. But also the beauty is, because you put that on your list last night, your subconscious has slotted it into place, so it doesn't feel quite so scary or ominous come the next morning anyway. And the big thing you will find is, once you eat that frog, then you get that huge sense of relief because it's done. You're so pleased with yourself for getting it done. You can stop stressed about it, stop worrying about it, stop putting it off. And actually what happens is, once that slimy frog is dispensed with, your productivity actually goes through the roof because you're not inadvertently putting everything else off. So that's tip number 5. Tip number 6 is my little kind of secret bonus tip, which is, if you find yourself in that place where you just feel totally and utterly overwhelmed, you know, you've got so much to do and you've tried all the tips and you've tried all the techniques and you just don't feel you're making inroads, and you're in that place where you sort of feel almost paralyzed with inactivity because everything is just so monumental, then the simple thing to do at that point in time is take action. It doesn't matter what action. So you don't have to go into that whole theory of what's the one most important thing that I should be focusing on right now. You don't have to, at that moment in time, think about which is my ultimate priority. Find something off that list that you can tick off, cross off, get done, because action defeats overwhelm every single time. And once you do one thing, then you'll almost find that that releases the floodwaters then, and you're back into that zone of just getting active. So you might have to find 2 or 3 really simple things to do. But if you just find yourself in that place of kind of analysis paralysis or just overwhelmed completely, so you just feel totally stuck, just pick one thing and get it done. Pick something easy, something fast, something enjoyable, and actually just take that off the list and get it done. And that will get you out of that sort of paralysis and real overwhelm and give you a kickstart then to get back in your groove and really start making things happen. Okay, so that concludes my tips. We've got 5 minutes left. So I know there's a couple of questions in the comments, so I'm just going to have a quick whiz through those. But for anybody else,
that was fantastic, Paula. And I've been keeping an eye on some questions coming through to make life a little bit easier for you. So
perfect. Thank you, Paul.
So you don't have to scroll through. But you know, first things first, it was great, and it was really good to hear those tips. There's one question here which I think is fantastic, to be fair. Somebody has said, Paula, due to your background, you must have had many days where you didn't want to carry out a particular task or training or what have you. How did you manage to motivate yourself to just kind of crack on and do it, basically?
Yes, definitely. I do I do remember good old days of going down to the track when it's snowing, and we had a tyre pulling session going on. So yeah, there were definitely some days there which were I would have loved to be anywhere else, but I think the key to that for me comes down to 2 particular things. And The first one actually is to constantly stay focused on the end game, the end goal. So, you know, as an athlete, there is always a particular competition. There is always a sort of deadline, a date. There's something fabulous, you know, something you're really looking forward to, that then can keep you on track. So I think it's almost stepping out of I don't want to do this task right now. It's stop thinking about that individual task and think about the bigger purpose and what's the reason for it. And sometimes that can sort of snap you out of that kind of demotivation. I've just made up a new word.
I like it.
I was going to give you a second tip on that, and I'm thinking, where's my second tip gone? I don't know, it'll come back to me in a minute, won't it? I said I've got 2 great tips on that, and the second one's just literally come in and gone out the window. I think, again, though, sort of having clarity on your business goals, your business plans, and reminding yourself what it's all about, so that it's not just that task right in front of you. And sometimes it's also about thinking about the bigger picture. So, you know, it isn't just about, well, okay, if I do this, I might one day make some money. It's thinking about, if I grow my business, who else does that help? You know, it's not just you and it's not just the business, it's that real kind of big picture stuff and the whole impact that you want to create on the world.
Brilliant. You answered some of the questions that were coming through live. The rest of the comments have been ones of praise, to be fair. Ooh. Which is always good to hear, isn't it? So if anybody else has got any questions, then kind of feel free to either jump off mute or put them into the chat box. Whilst we're waiting to see if there's any more coming through, how can people get in touch with you and contact you, Paula?
Yes, a double whammy on that one, because I have remembered the other half of my little tip now, and it's a bit ironic, isn't it? My other half actually is have a great coach. And I think it's very easy to get sort of stuck in our business and stuck in our head. And funny enough, my TED talk I delivered last year was very much about the lessons for me from athletics and how that actually applies to my business and my life. And I think sometimes we can get stuck, whereas somebody else can give us that, you know, the outside eyes looking in, the kick when we need it, the cajole when we need it, the bit of counselling when we need it. So I think having a support network or a coach is something that can really, really help you when you feel a bit demotivated. So yes, in terms of getting hold of me, you'll find me on Facebook or on LinkedIn. So I'm quite happy to connect personally on both of those platforms. I also have a free Facebook group, which is called the Business Growth Community. So probably quite similar to your group, Paul, and lots of little kind of snippets and tips and things like that very regularly. I think that kind of covers what you need from me for now, I think.
Fantastic. And I think one great last question to finish up with, if you have a procrastination type personality, what would be your best tip?
Okay. I'm thinking of particular clients who are real procrastination type personalities now. Probably a couple of tips. One of them, funnily enough, and I know this sounds crazily counterintuitive, is one of them is actually to understand that a little bit of faffing every day does you good. And sometimes we get distracted because actually we're just trying to work too damn hard. We're trying to constantly work all the time. We don't take enough breaks. And that can be one of the real causes of it. The second thing I would say is that if you are definitely a real procrastination person, is to probably look at working in short bursts. So if you, for instance, say, I'm going to, I don't know, rewrite my website and that's my job for Tuesday, it's too big, it's massive. None of us can concentrate for that length of time. So really think about what is your natural concentration span, and again, use the schedules, use the deadlines, really get to understand your own habits. You can use also things like rewards and consequences for things like that. So you might say, right, I'm going to spend an hour working on the website and then I'm going to have a cup of tea or a chocolate, whatever that is. Just give yourself a little reward, or alternatively go with the consequence side of things and say, I'm not having my lunch until I've done such a thing.
Brilliant.
So yeah.
Fantastic. Well, look, that's wonderful advice, and it's some great tips for us all to think about today. So thank you on behalf of everyone. I know everyone's been really complimentary in the chat box, so so everyone's really enjoyed it. So on behalf of everyone, thanks so much for your time today. I know that you're very busy, so you know, it means a lot to all of us to kind of give up precious time to come and have a chat with us. So thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks again for the invite, and thank you for everybody for tuning in and being so very nice and complimentary.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks to everyone who's joined us as well. Thanks for all your support, guys. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
Cheers.